Hello and welcome back to the worst Warmachine channel on the internet. I'm Dorian and it's time for another Warmachine Weekly. Now this is again an extra one for this week because we have a new content manipulator. That's going to be Doucette. And so Doucette actually became a content manipulator in hopes of making me feel pain. He saw the video that I did where I had some hot sauce in order to go and join the Infernals and thought like, it would be fun if I actually made Malorian have to do this while I answer some questions. That'll take some time to develop, so I think we're doing that next month. But for this month, what David's question was is, what are your tips for things where it comes to off-meta lists? Not really jank lists, but things that are just off-meta. And so I think this is a really great question. We're going to start by really kind of defining what it is to be like, meta, competitive, off-meta jank, and then really talk about ways that you can help and find success in being in that area there of the off-meta. So obviously, if we're getting into these definitions, anything that's going to be competitive and meta, that is just the best that's out there. Now, best is, again, why the meta comes in. Something that dominates in one region, maybe it's an Agathon list, maybe it's Strange Bedfellows, whatever, might struggle in other areas. And so it really depends. Your meta, the people in your area, what are they playing? What do you normally see? A lot of anti-shooting tech, a lot of control. What are you going to be seeing so you can have a list that's going to be dominating in that area? Of course, another thing that you have to be keeping in mind is also the idea that this is a game and there's lots of models and some models are better than others. And so just like how you want to be picking a list that will do well in that meta and what you expect to see, you also want to be using the models that are better than others, right? I mean, everything is kind of a balance of points to what it does. But look, over the grand scale of things, if you're trying to do a certain strategy, whether it's range, combat, control, whatever, some things do that better for the points than other things. So you also have to be keeping in mind that you're going to be building your list with those things. That is that ultra competitive meta side of things. Now, let's jump all the way over to the other spectrum and talk about jank. Jank takes a look of anything that's in that meta and says, nah, I'm not doing any of that. Sure, right now the meta is all about taking like Agathon and like magicking you to death, or taking straight bedfellows and taking a souped up, gaspy 4 and ramming up your rear and just crushing your opponent that way. Okay. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to look for something weird, a strategy that nobody's playing so that I can catch my opponent off guard. They don't see this crazy jank play that I'm going for, and it's like dark horsing, it's whatever. I'm going to try and surprise them, or even if not surprising them, they're not teching for this crazy other strategy, so I'm going to try and hit them with that, right? Everybody's going with all these elite models. I'm just going to go and I'm going to take like all the infantry. I'm going to say like, can you deal with this? Especially when you're on the clock. That is the jank side of things. So what David was actually asking for though is not jank, not competitive, off meta, something there in the middle where you're meaning to be competitive. You're meaning to try and deal with what seems to be good for the meta right now, but you're not kind of like taking the best pieces for one reason or another. Now, one reason why you might be doing this is one of the reasons that David actually brought up in the message he gave me, is that you're coming back in this post Corona era where you're now maybe don't have all the best pieces, right? You're walking into this and you haven't made any purchases for 2 years. And so you don't have all the best things. We talked about that to be competitive. One part of that is to know your meta and to build for it. But another part is in building those lists, taking all the best pieces. And if you don't have all the latest and greatest from the last X years, well, it's going to be that much weaker. Another thing too is that you might not even know all the best things to take, because going into this, like you haven't been following the meta, you haven't been playing for 2 years, so it might not even dawn on you. You have an idea, right? You're a competitive person. You have an idea that this is good and this is what you have to deal with, but you don't yet have all that knowledge to really try and make your list be as optimized as absolutely possible. Now, that's one part of it, but another part that I also want to be touching on in here too is purposely going off meta. Again, not really going to jank, but also going with something where it is close to what the meta is, but not quite. And so I think I want to pump the brakes on that. I want that idea to be in your head, but I want to come to that later. Let's start with this first part here, though, talking about the idea of you just don't have the best pieces. And there's also a little bit of that knowledge issue that's going to be there. The first thing I want to talk about is that knowledge issue. And the only way to really deal with that is to play. I've been talking to people where like, I haven't played in 2 years. I don't want to come in and embarrass myself. I know that I'm not up to what's all going out there. So I'd rather, you know what? I'm just not going to come out. I'm going to do something else now. No, don't do that. Come out and play. The only way you're going to learn this game is by playing. So if you're worried that the real handicap you have coming into this is that difference in knowledge, well, the only way to rectify that is to get that knowledge. And you can get part of that by doing your own research and looking things up and reading rules. But honestly, the best way to do that is just get in there, get those games, and actually learn what you're dealing with, right? It's one thing to understand, like, okay, Agathon's going to try and mind zap you, so I have to be a little bit safe in camping. And then it's something completely different to see it on the board being like, oh, wow, okay, things are being summoned, and I thought I had things in the way, but then this was Dark Seduction out of the way, this was moved out of the way, and then this gap came here, or you didn't go for my cast, or you zapped down all my powerful solos, right? Like, playing it really makes you understand what to actually expect. So that's the easiest one. It doesn't really require you to invest any money, just to invest the time and really enjoy the hobby that you want to enjoy anyway. So that's a big part of it, is first of all, just get out there and play, and that's going to actually just help you increase. You might lose your first X games as you're relearning that meta and what's going to be most optimized into it, but that's fine, right? If your worry is that I don't have the best list right now, who cares? Take what you think is appropriate, realize that it is off meta, realize it's not optimized, and then go in learning what you can to actually optimize it. Now, let's actually talk about the idea of being optimized. Now, I think one of the best ways that I like to explain this is, again, using like a Magic the Gathering reference, where for those who don't know, in Magic the Gathering, you need to be using lands to be making mana, and you need to tap these things and have all your colors. And so obviously, if you have one card that gives you two types of mana options, just boom, there it is. Well, that's fantastic. Instead of having one card, this does both. That's fantastic. Well, these dual lands, as they're called, are worth thousands of dollars. They are extremely expensive. Meanwhile, you have other cards that also give you access to this mana, but it comes in tapped, or you take damage for it to come in, or there's some negative thing that happens. And for these, instead of being thousands of dollars, these things are actually just going to be like $10 or like $2. And so the real question is that when it comes to being optimized, one is better than the other, right? Well, obviously having something that just gives you these resources for no negative whatsoever is better. However, these other things that have this slight negative where they come in tapped and you got to wait for them for a turn, so really it's kind of like investing in the future, or the ones that come in and damage you, that's obviously a negative. But what is actually the increase it's going to be having in your game? If I play 100 games, one with dual lands and another set of 100 where I have these other, have a penalty to them lands, what's going to be my difference in actually winning the game? And there might be a difference there, maybe just throwing numbers out there, maybe when I had the dual lands, the 100, I won 65. Good, okay, great winning record. But when I played those same ones without those dual lands, I won 62. Is it really worth it? I mean, obviously, if I want to be an optimized list, I want to be having that best thing. But overall, for the 100 games, and especially when you're looking at the cost of the difference, does it really matter if I invest that difference and win slightly more? Now, I think that's a very easy thing to be looking at in Magic the Gathering, but bringing this back over here to Warmachine, the same thing really applies. If I'm looking at this and it's like, wow, Tauros are amazing for their point cost. I don't own Tauros. I played back in the time where there's nomads. Obviously for 1 point, it's better to have something with higher armor and counter charge and blah, blah, blah. So obviously I want to have the Tauros. But again, if I played 100 games, these ones with Tauros, these ones with nomads, will there actually be a significant difference in the amount that I actually win those games? Also keep in mind that in this case here, for every nomad that I have rather than a Tauros, I do have that extra point, which can be invested in something else. That's something else you're getting there. And so that really then calls into the question of what is the value of ultimate optimization, right? Is it really worth it? Especially when I'm thinking about this financially, right? I'm coming back into this game, and so there's all these new things. What do I want to be buying to do this? I might want to be also thinking about what the value is per the dollar. Am I okay losing an extra 5 games out of 100, but then having an extra $200 in my bank account? Maybe. And so I think that's a very important thing to be thinking about with this playing off meta, that you might be doing this also for financial reasons. The idea that, yes, I could buy these things, but you know what? Maybe I am not in that situation where I have this extra money lying around that I can just buy the best things all the time. Maybe I just want to be optimized because, sure, I have the money, but I'd rather go camping with this money. I'd rather go out and spend this on movies or whatever it is. I have other things I want to do with this money. And it might feel bad for you, like competitive wise, like, oh, I guess I just lose now. But do you? Or do you just lose a couple more games out of 100, right? Especially when we're talking about, look, if you win half your games, you're probably doing all right? You're there in the middle. And so little differences either way is not going to really change your overall experience. And sure, there might be some choices where if you had this, wow, you go from 50% of your games won to 75%. But those are going to be far and few in between. So realize that the investment to the effectiveness is not really the same. Let's go and also look at some things here too, where like Asphyxious, right? Gas before, amazing. This is probably one of the biggest, best things you can throw on your list if you can, right? You might not even be in one of those factions, and that's not even a possibility, but Gas before for 14 points. You can't buy a heavy that's that effective for 14 points. Plus it's giving all its bonuses to the rest of your army and all the rest of these things. Like, it's just amazing. Clouds, all this stuff. That's probably something that's going to have like the biggest effect if you can do it. But what if you don't? And what if instead, talking for like, a Magnus player, if I'm going to be taking gas before, or do I just throw in a Tauros? Well, one of the things I can be thinking about here is that obviously if I go for the gas before, that's going to be much more powerful. But if I'm leaning a different way, this is also a game that has different strategies. And maybe what I can do then is lean into this and be like, okay, I don't have the gas before. I am not going to be the ultimate, I threaten very far and I hit really hard and I play with clouds and stuff like this. I'm going to lean into something else. I'm going to say, instead of having Asphyxious is Sanctified with its own battle group and points being dedicated to this, with probably a stalker or whatever way you go, no, I'm going to go and lean more into having things into Magnus's a battle group. Now, what does that give me? Well, for Magnus 2, you get unyielding. Oh, so maybe we can go for an armor skew that's happening here with my actual list that I didn't go the other way, right? If that Toro or whatever was with Gatsby, it didn't get that extra armor. It was all offense and long threat, but now I'm going to be leaning more towards the idea of higher armor. And then once I start leaning to other strategies, it might lead me to be thinking about other choices. Now let's start talking about that. I wanted you to think about that as I said that before, but now let's focus on it. Let's say you had, Sloan. And you're like, Sloan is powerful. It is going to go in there and shoot down all the things. But I just don't own all these hunters and all these defenders. Reliance as the new hotness is. Which way do I want to be going with this? This is a lot of money I'd have to invest. Sure, I might have a Sloan model, but I don't own all these other things. Do I really want to be investing all the money when I could be going with something else? Well, let's talk about the difference between Sloan and Haley 1. Sloan lets your battle group shoot twice. Haley 1 lets all your models get an extra attack. Oh, that's kind of the same thing, isn't it? If I had a battle group, this means that they shot twice with one model and they shot twice with the other model. Oh, okay, well, that's interesting. Well, what else is in there? Well, Sloan is really powerful because you also ignore clouds, and you also have things like guided fire that can help everything. You get fire group for free, so there's extra threats. So it really has a lot of anti-counter tech, right? If somebody's trying to hide behind stealth or clouds, you just ignore all that. Okay, well, we don't have that with Haley, so that's unfortunate. But what can we lean into? Well, we can learn into other strategies, kind of like how we talked about before. What if I actually took Haley 1 and instead of really focusing on the battle group, I took some other pieces that did really well? What happens when I have things like my arcane riflemen shooting twice and doing a guaranteed 6 damage? Okay, that's pretty good, especially when I'm picking where that goes. What if I lean into like the lightning stuff, right? What if I have Storm Striders and each of those Storm Striders are shooting an additional time? Oh, that's pretty good. All these things that Sloan didn't do, Haley could do. And sure, Sloan had some of these things that Sloan does, like ignoring the clouds and the stealth, but what are the other things that Haley has? Well, Haley has just disruption on a stick. I can just cast a spell, scramble, and boom, you're disrupted. If you're in a spot that's seeing a lot of powerful jacks right now, like Malvin and Mayhem or who knows what it is, boop, you're disrupted. Oh, that might be a massive deal for where you're playing. So again, when we're looking at that effectiveness, if I was to play 100 games, exactly the same list, all big battle group, lots of hunters, defenders, reliance, however it's built, and I play 100 with Sloan and 100 with Haley 1, exactly the same build, my winning percentage is probably pretty close. I'm playing off meta for whatever reason, but I have that. And then at the same time, once I really accept the idea that I am playing off meta, it lets me lean into some other strategies. Not going all the way to jank, right? We're not pulling out our Jakes 2 or whatever else it is, but just enough being like, well, if I scooch over here and realize that I no longer am optimized in that, how can I make that up by having strengths in other areas, right? And I can start building that into my force. So I think that's really where you want to look. One, realize that the only way you can get past a mental hurdle is by playing the game and learning it. So don't let these other things hold you back. If it's like, I got to figure these things out. No. Play your games, and then while in between these gaming nights, then that's where you can be like, okay, maybe I can switch this. This is what I'm looking for. I don't own this, but I could be doing something else. Play those games first. That's the big priority, and then you can learn where you actually need to lean. Second of all, just be mentally comfortable that there are advantages to not being optimized, and that the benefits that you're getting from being perfectly optimized is probably not as big as you think, right? It'll be obviously helping you, but it's not going to be that huge difference of like, oh, I was winning no games and now I'm winning every game. And that's not the difference we're talking about. We're talking a lot smaller. Plus understanding that the money that you could have been spending to be optimized can now be spent on other things. And that just means that you got benefit in somewhere else, right? You're suffering in one area a little bit, so you can be having these benefits in these other areas. And so all of a sudden, when you do have those losses where it turns out like, oh, if I was just having this one optimized piece, then I would, okay, well then you can be more fine with that. I know I lost this one game. I'm going to lose this 1, 2, 3 extra games per year, but I got to have this new TV or whatever else instead, right? So that kind of really helps soften that. But more competitively, the last thing you need to do is figure out the way that you're leaning off meta. Again, you're not as optimized in these areas that the meta's trying to really force this, but clearly, if you're moving somewhere else, you now have a new strength to your arsenal. So look at that new strength, see how you can utilize it, and then use that as much as you can. And that's going to help make up that difference. Again, it might be that you're still going to be losing a few more games over your 100, but maybe you can be reducing that. So instead of going down from 65 to 60 or 65 to 55, whatever the number is, well, maybe now by leaning into that, I soften that. And now it's just the 65 to 60 or something like that. So realize that you can soften those things by looking for where those strengths are. Eventually, if you want to go all the way into this, you might be going into jank territory. But again, we're kind of talking about just slightly off meta here. So there you go. I hopefully gave you something that's going to let you feel better when, maybe you're coming in from after the dark ages here and you haven't been playing games, or you just haven't bought this stuff, or you don't have the money to, or you'd rather spend the money on something else, and really reassured you that playing off meta is not really that big of a deal. You don't need to be playing ultra competitive all the time, and there are limited penalties to be playing off meta and real financial benefits to be playing off meta. And it can also be mentally thrilling as well to be trying to find these ways to get the bonuses and benefits from whatever way you are leaning with this. So there you go. Thanks for watching. Again, thank you, David Doucette, for being the content overlord for this one here and suggesting it. Thank you to all my other patrons as well, and to everybody else. We'll catch you later. Bye.